Hey, Salena Zito, welcome to Battleground.
Hey, Sean, how are you doing?
I am doing really, really good. And for everybody that's watching or maybe listening to this, I want to give people a little bit of a background for you. So you've been writing for decades now.
Ever.
You've basically interviewed, what is it, every president and vice president in the 21st century. You're a nationally syndicated columnist for the New York Post and the Washington Examiner. You've worked for Democrats, worked for Republicans. And the reason why I read your stuff every week, Salena, and I think so many people rely on you for news, is because I think you're one of the last true beat reporters. I think you're like the Lois Lane of our time. And you know, what I admire the most about you is the fact that you give a voice to people who feel like they've been forgotten in this country. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Thank you so much. I try to approach covering American politics, but also covering American culture by taking the back roads across the country. So it's not like a thing I do, it's how I approach it. I never take the turnpike, I never take an interstate. I always take an old US route or a state route. Once in a while, I've been on some crazy dirt road. Some I thought I had no idea where I was going to end up being. I don't stay in major hotels. I always stay in a bed and breakfast or an inn, because the first person I meet in a town is a small business owner, and they can pretty much, well, small business people know where all the bodies are buried, right? So I get the first gossip about town, about what's going on. But traveling those back roads are important because I can see how counties are changing for the better, for the worse, what's going on, what's the industry, what's the vibe, how's the community look, how the church, how robust is the faith community, how robust are the social fraternities like Elks and Kiwanis and Rotary clubs, the sort of things that keep people connected in communities, and as well as what is the economic driver. So that's what really helps me understand what is going on in the country, and I report it from that place.
I mean, I love that because, you hear the phrase all the time that politics is downstream from culture. And so and by the way, I think that we are awash with inside the Beltway type reporting. I think that we're awash with national news reporting. I mean, people tune in to national news networks all the time to get their news. But the reality is so much of the news and the culture is cultivated in spots that you go to where, frankly, most journalists don't. And so I think it gives you, and luckily for all of us here in this great country that we live in, it gives a lot of us a perspective that we wouldn't otherwise have without you out there doing it. And so I want to get your thoughts on can we first start with the Republican vote for Speaker of the House that happened last week? 15 rounds of voting. It was and I think many people reported on it as if, it was absolute chaos on the House floor and the Republican Party is in total disarray. And I guess I want to ask you, do you think that those types of debates on the House floor make the Republican Party weaker or stronger?
I think it makes them stronger. I think if you are looking at it from 30,000 feet and you are not looking at the historical context of it, you would think Republicans are in disarray. This is why I never write a story that is for a click, because you have to dive deep in understanding probably much to all of my boss's consternations. But you have to dive deep into why things happen. I think that last week had something for everyone, and that's kind of important. I think it was very reflective of who we are. Also very important. The member of the House is the one that is most like you, the one that is most represents where you're from. So of course there was going to be a small percentage, nonetheless, a vocal percentage that held things up. It's no different than if you go out and have a conversation in your family or with your friends. There is a minority that wants their voice to be held. I think it got to a certain point, though, where some people were like, okay, now some of these characters are doing it for their own glory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when people got turned off. Again, completely normal, because just think about anyone you ever interact with in your day. There's always that person's like, yeah, they're totally doing that for themselves. This is not about the greater good of anything. And so I think it was a mixed bag. And it's a week later, we're not even talking about it. So
I mean, I think it's fascinating when you look at the cultural differences between how, say, the Democrats do things in the House of Representatives versus how the Republicans do. It never seems like the Democrats have this problem. It seems like they are always united in purpose, regardless of what sort of legislation that they're putting forward. And over, having run 2 campaigns and gotten an inside look at some of this stuff, it always reminds me, this is how I at least view the Democrat Party versus the Republican Party. The Democrat Party seems to be the party of they, the people, where their messaging and their legislation are crafted by 2 or 3 people in Washington, and those talking points are fed down to both their members in the House and the Senate, and then also media outlets all over the country. And you see those talking points sort of regurgitated time and again on Twitter from actual members and their cohorts in the national media, where Republicans are the party of we the people, which is why you have such vast differences between a Republican congressman from, say, Western Pennsylvania and a Republican congressman from, say, Southern California and a Republican congressman from, say, Florida, because I personally believe, and of course I'm biased, you're the journalist here, you're the fair and balanced journalist here, but I think that Republicans truly represent, or at least try to represent, the people in the House of Representatives, which is why you always have these little fractures and debates, which I agree with you. I think ultimately they make the Republican Party stronger. And as you mentioned, we're not even talking about it this week, and Kevin McCarthy seems like, man, he's a Speaker of the House is on a mission. They've already voted on legislation which would stop funding for the 87,000 IRS agents. They've already created a special commission to investigate China. It seems like they're on the right track.
yeah, he brought a number of members to Western Pennsylvania, to Monongahela, to roll out their, I don't remember, were you there? It was a really great event. It was right along the Mon River, in a place where half the people couldn't, if you went to Washington, D.C., they wouldn't even know how to pronounce the name of the town, right? And I thought that was important, because everything they talked to about in that event, they had a town hall event and people asked questions, that they are now putting in place in their first couple of days of Congress. That's really important. That is incredibly important, because they ran on something and now they're doing it. And that rarely happens, right? That rarely happens. And so I think that is important, that they continue to do that. Kevin McCarthy, I never thought he was going to lose the speakership. I just, he's resilient. He knows not to back down, and ultimately you kind of want that for for the leader of your party. Now he is the Speaker of the whole House. He's got all 435 of them. But I want to circle back just for a second to your point that you made about the Democrats versus the Republicans. The Democrats always consider themselves a Big Tent party. And while that's true, they also make their members fall in line, where Republicans sort of it's like Festivus, right? You can have like your airing grievances, before we all come together. So there's a very big difference between falling in line and coming together. And it doesn't mean there's not boiling points within the Democratic Party. There certainly is. You see that in primary races for whoever is running for an elected office within the Democratic Party. My profession tends to only focus on problems that are happening within the Republican Party, but I think that the Democratic Party has the same kinds of issues. Both these coalitions are changing. Politics are like tectonic plates, and they keep moving very slowly in one direction or the other. There's always movement politics within a party. Some break off, some stay together. I think we are witnessing that right now. There is a coalition that makes up the Republican Party. I wrote a book about it, and these people are from there's blue collar, there's suburban, there are upper middle class, there are people living along the poverty line who all identify as conservatives. They don't all eat from the same buffet table. They don't have all the same issues, but at their heart, they're conservative. And so that's what the challenge that you see in that House race for Speaker.
Well, speaking of the Speaker, I think he had one of his first or maybe second news conferences today where he's addressing the news of the day, which was Joe Biden. They found another batch of classified documents in one of Joe Biden's many residences. And I think as someone who's looking at this from a relatively cynical standpoint, it's like, I think the real question is, where hasn't Joe Biden left classified documents at this point? But Speaker McCarthy said that he thought that Congress needed to investigate that. And I guess for me, as someone who served in the military, had a top secret government security clearance back in the day, if I went out to the podium and said that, hey, don't worry, I just had top secret documents in my garage next to my car. Don't worry, everything's cool though. Everything's cool. That wouldn't fly for me. And so, especially when this is coming on the heels of the FBI raiding President Trump down at Mar-a-Lago, what is your take on all of this craziness right now, Salena?
So let's go backwards for just a second. Our distrust with government was at a peak in 1968. 72% of Americans trusted the government. That began to collapse in 1968. What happened? The Vietnam War and how Lyndon Baines Johnson was prosecuting it, but also sort of what was really going on there. That then began to collapse more in 1974 with Richard Nixon. It wasn't just Watergate. It was the CIA was involved. The FBI was involved. Why are we supposed to trust these people, right? And so our distrust with government has been collapsing for the past 40 years. And so I think that these problems with the Biden White House and with Joe Biden, it just sort of I think you are going to find that it's not just going to be Republicans that are upset about this. I think you are going to find that Democrats are as well. It is the one thing that we can be unified with in terms of what's the old saying when I began as a reporter? Follow the money. So you've got to find out, you've got to get to the granular reason as to why this happened. To Merrick Garland's great credit today, he appointed a special counsel to this. And I think that's important. I think it's also important that Congress takes a look at this, takes a look at anyone who is mishandling things. The people the people like you in the military put your lives at risk to protect the essence of our government.
Well, I agree with you. And, and you talk about the fact that Democrats and Republicans might unite behind the need to look at this, investigate this, and draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, like, as Americans, our government needs to do better. In fact, you addressed that sense of community in one of your latest columns in Somerset, Pennsylvania, which is one of my favorite places in Pennsylvania, small town America. and the idea that bowling is bringing people together in ways in Somerset that was perhaps unexpected. And I like the column, again, because you're giving voice to the everyman and
Right.
woman, and you're highlighting those small town communities that really make this country truly exceptional. And if you look at some of the stereotypes, especially in communities in Pennsylvania with people, places like Somerset, the perception, I think, is that these are small post-industrial towns that have offshored their jobs. Communities are dwindling. Enrollment in clubs and involvement in politics is dwindling because people were moving out.
Right.
Tell us about that column.
Well, the bottom line about that story is I walk into this, like, just by happenstance, walk into this Terrace Lanes bowling center in the middle of Somerset, Pennsylvania. And I walk in, as our grandmothers always say, you could eat off the floor. That's how clean it was. And it was vibrant. It was rocking. And I just thought about that book, Bowling Alone, and which gave this idea that small town America is falling apart, that our social fabric is falling apart. And I think there is some of that. However, I don't think we've been looking at all of it. What is Somerset County? And I have a geography professor that makes this point. What is the town of Somerset? What if, being the size that it is today, which is about 12,000, what if that's what the size it was supposed to be? Why does it always have to be bigger? Mm-hmm. It did have a higher growth in the 60s, 50s, let's say from the 30s to the 80s during the peak of industrialization, but then went back to its original size. Why can't we accept that? People are happy there. The faith community is strong. The school districts are strong. The social fabric is strong. Maybe we've been looking at this the wrong way. Maybe they shouldn't have to be big. People are happy there. And by the way, you could be 3 years old or you could be 93 years old. You could walk into a bowling alley, and I kid you not, I saw examples of it that day. And you could walk into a bowling alley, join a league, and be a member of a community within seconds.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought of the idea that bowling could be something that were tying people together in communities, but you're right. I think I read in your article, it's one of, if not the largest participation sport in the country.
In the world.
In the world.
As in the country, and the sport is growing robustly. Go to a bowling alley, meet someone, make some friends, go with your friends. And just there is a joy there. I guess it's because everyone's, they're being competitive, but they're being friends, and they're interacting with each other, and everybody is happy.
Well, Salena, this is part of the reason why I love you, and part of the reason why millions of people around this country read your stories so they can get a sense of what people in this country go through. And it, as I mentioned several times already, that's what part of what I admire the most about you is that you just work so hard to get these stories right. And we're so grateful. And if you're interested in reading more of the great Salena Zito's columns and her writings and her musings, you can check out her book, The Great Revolt. Right, it was a bestseller. Really, like, you were one of the few people that saw the freight train of Donald Trump coming down the railroad tracks, for sure. But your columns are great. They each tell a story. Go to salenazito.com. Check out her work. And I think we're going to be having you back somewhat regularly on this program, which is a very, very awesome thing.
Thank you. I really would love to. We do the next show. I talked to poultry farmers across the state in the past few days. I'll be writing up a story. And we're obviously, as consumers, feeling the impact of the price of eggs. Ugh. But they're going through is devastating.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about it. So tune in next week for your segment. I love it. And Salena, thank you very, very much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
See ya.